There's a small piece of kit that belongs in your toolbox, no matter what kind of boat you have or how old it is. Yes, I'm talking about sandpaper, and I'm going to demystify two really important things about it. Hi, I'm Nika Waters, and welcome to the Boat Galley Podcast. Yes, indeed, it's Sandpaper 101 time. Today's episode of the Boat Galley Podcast is sponsored by Lunatech, makers of the hydration spray bottle, odor-free dishcloth, and self-cleaning washcloth. Lunatech offers practical gear designed to save water and reduce waste. A water bottle that doubles as a hose? A dishcloth that doesn't get stinky? Yes, please. Visit lunatechgear.com to learn more. Use code BOATGALLEY to save 10% on everything. Lunatech, innovative gear for your outdoor adventures. Sandpaper is a useful piece, in fact, I would argue a critical piece of any toolkit. You don't only need it to prep for painting, which is our current love and obsession, but let's say you need to clean off the contacts on a battery, or you need to shine down something before you apply it to something else. Sandpaper has endless uses on board, and if you don't have it, you will find the lack of it sooner than you actually wish. But sandpaper can be confusing. Between the grits and the kind of sandpaper and how you're going to be using it, how do you make sense of it? So I thought a really quick primer might be helpful. The very first thing to consider when you're talking about sandpaper is grits. And what does that mean? Basically, the lower number of grit, the coarser the sandpaper. A way that I think about it is that the bits of sand are larger, meaning that fewer of them would fit through some imaginary sieve. 40, 60, and 80 grit sandpaper, which is considered coarse to medium, it will make quick work of paint removal. It'll also make really quick work of anything subsurface, and it will leave absolutely visible gouge marks. We do have all three grits on board, but we only use 40 as a grinder level grit on fiberglass. So if we're needing to take fiberglass down that's going to be hidden behind something else, we'll use that on a grinder. The other two are for maybe making quicker work of old paint removal or something else like that. The next level up is the kind of fine and very fine sandpaper, and that's 120 and 220. Some people will consider 320 fine sandpaper. But those are the ones that we use the most. They're the ones that we use so frequently, we actually have been known to look for packs of 100 sheets. This level grit, the 120 and 220 and 320, they're really good at smoothing out the gouges that are left by more aggressive sanding. But they also, particularly the 120 and 220, they'll leave enough tooth for the next paint layer to adhere. Our general thinking on this is that we tend to use 120 grit between primer coats and 220 and 320 when we're talking about going in between paint layers. And then you get into fine detail work, very, very fine kind of sandpaper, which is 320 and up. And you can actually get up to 1600 grit or even 3000. The bigger the number, the smaller the scratches. So if you're going to be doing something like polishing stainless or polishing metal, you want to do it with something more like 600 or even higher. So grit is one thing you just want to keep track of. And my suggestion is you probably want to have 3 different levels in your toolkit. Even one sheet is a place to start. And I might start with an 80. I would definitely then have a 220, and then I'd have a 320. And then the next thing you want to consider is adhesion. I don't really know how to talk about that, but it's how you fix the sandpaper to whatever it is that you're sanding with. Because while you might sand with your hand, you also might sand with a sanding block or even a sander and a hand sander or an orbital sander. And be mindful of what system your sander needs and be sure to buy the appropriate paper. You've got plain paper, which is probably what you think of when you think of sandpaper. You can use it with your hands, with sanding blocks, with power sanders that use some kind of mechanical fastening that usually is some kind of a pressure arm sort of a thing. Another way that paper is adhered to places is with sticky. And it is only good with special sanding pads that are designed to take this kind of paper. There's plain paper, there's sticky paper, and then the third is hook and loop paper. It's kind of like Velcro. And you want to use this with the sanding pads that are designed to take this kind of paper. The orbital sander that we have, it came with a hook and loop pad, so this is the kind of paper we need to have to use it. And you can use plain paper or sticky paper or hook and loop paper as hand sanding. That's no problem. You can definitely do it on your hands. I think sticky would be challenging just because it might stick to your fingers, but that might not be a terrible thing. But make sure that, particularly if you're talking about some kind of a power sander, that you're buying paper that's appropriate to the way it needs to be affixed to your power sander of some sort. One of the things to think about that's beyond the two pieces of advice and pieces of basics about sandpaper is the cost. And sandpaper is expensive. It feels ridiculous when you look at what it is. When you buy it by the individual sheet, it can cost up to $4 for each sheet. And I can go through 5 sheets of sandpaper in one good day of sanding the bulwarks, which hopefully is a project is done for us for decades. But you can save money by buying it in multi-packs. The last time we went to buy sandpaper, we decided we were just going to try a cheaper brand. It was like $10 for 25 sheets instead of the 3M brand that was $14 for 20 sheets. But bottom line, we actually would spend the money for the 3M next time. We often fold the paper or bend it in order to get it into little nooks and crannies. I like to take a quarter sheet, fold it into thirds, and use each part systematically. The cheaper version of sandpaper that we found on Amazon that will pop up very quickly in the results seems to have a very thick, coarse backing paper that anytime you try to fold it, basically it breaks. So you can't really bend it into a curve to get it a rounded part. And if you were trying to fit it onto a palm sander with mechanical pressure arms, it would be an exercise in serious frustration. So it may be worth going to a local hardware store and paying more money to get an individual sheet to check to see that it will fold and conform to the places that you want to sand, rather than just go with the cheapest version that there is out there. There are lots and lots of other things to think about with sandpaper, but I thought I would start with these 2 things for you to be aware of, because these are actually the most important. One is grit, and the second is adhesion, or how that paper fits onto whatever you're using it to sand with. I can't wait to share an anchorage with you when neither one of us happens to be sanding anything, because as good as sandpaper is, it's really good when you're not having to use it all the time. Thank you so much for listening to the Boat Galley podcast. We love hearing from our listeners. We love it when you don't forget to subscribe, and we love it when you share us with your friends. Have the most fantastic day.